All right, thanks for joining our October Time to Restore quarterly call. We can start out with just some general announcements or anything anyone wants to share. I have a couple updates I can share about just general trainings and reshare the newsletter and stuff like that. But does anyone want to share anything from your part of the country? We were just chatting before I started the recording about monarchs and the season ending and the numbers looking pretty good in Oklahoma, which is great to hear.
Super sensitive. Hi. So I'd like to introduce Missy. We just hired, we weren't allowed to use program manager, but essentially we have a new coordination manager, I think is the title we got away with. And so Missy has jumped right in and has really moved us forward on the listening session and also some of our other workshops that we're hoping to roll out pretty quickly this year. So thanks for letting me jump in on your call.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us, Missy. We're really glad to have you on the team.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, and thank you for your feedback.
Yeah, did you want to share anything about the listening sessions plans as they're developing? I know it's still like we have some stuff to figure out, but we could just share a quick update on that.
Yeah, so I think we have a basic plan. We have wording for an initial invite to Isleta and Laguna Pueblos, as well as contacts from sorry.
Santa Ana? Or where are you thinking? Isleta?
Um no, Miss Begay. I forget her first name. Um uh sorry, yeah. So we'll be moving forward with those over the winter.
Uh-huh.
Um, and then we'll have probably a second and maybe third workshop in the north as well.
Yeah, I think it's great timing to try to we're like gonna get the word out about what we have so far and then try to get input on like what other people want to see from the project in the next year. So it seems really timely that we're able to do the listening sessions and get some feedback from people on just other resources that would be useful or a little bit of feedback on what we have so far. Thanks for organizing that. I think maybe you're frozen. In New Mexico is frozen right now, but we won't get them back. Anything else anyone wants to share?
Aaron, I'll jump in there if it's okay.
Go ahead.
Here in the land of the Lone Star Republic, Texas, and we've just started to hit some fallish weather. In fact, I think the high today is 84, which is almost unheard of in Texas, or maybe that's more of a Texas winter, actually. But anyway, we're starting to get fall, and that always brings the monarchs. So we've got monarchs aplenty right now. Mist flower, mealy blue sage, you name it, it's covered with them as they move through to Mexico. So we've been really excited. In terms of time to restore, this is kind of that part of the year where everything starts to get a little quiet as we go into the holidays. So we've tried to use that opportunity to work on some of our recognition outreach efforts. So right now we're working on going through the data set of observers that Texas has added over the last year or so and trying to identify those that are really working to increase the data set for the Time to Restore project. And in the next 4 to 6 weeks, we'll be recognizing some of them and figuring out ways to showcase some of their efforts as they're kind of sprinkled across the state. In terms of outreach, one more update in terms of outreach. We did just a week and a half ago, I did a major outreach effort in College Station, which was the host city for this year's 2025 Texas Master Naturalist annual meeting, which brings about 600 master naturalists from across the state to one location. And then lets them work on trying to build skill sets, build outreach for them for their own programs, and then learn a little bit more about what's going on in other parts of the state. So we made about 100 direct connections, and I was able to train about another 50 of those in the local chapter. So outreach is healthy in terms of what we continue to do here in Texas. And as we get into the holiday season and get ready for January and the next spring grow season, we'll be ready to go. So, Aaron, thanks for the opportunity to create an update.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, and just to add on to that, David's testing out a plant tag system as kind of a reward for observers that have been really active. And we're going with like a super basic option of a aluminum plant tag, kind of like the ones you see tied on trees or like forestry tags, but it's a little bit larger version. And then we basically are using vinyl Nature's Notebook stickers, which are fairly water resistant, and putting those on one side. And then people can write with a pen or a pencil the name of the plant and stuff to kind of mark where their plant is. And that hopefully helps people refine plants that go dormant in the winter and offers kind of an incentive to like, and a reminder to observe again the next year. So we're going to see how it goes. And then if it's popular, then we can definitely share those tags out with others too.
Yeah, let me add this, Aaron. One of the things that we were trying to do is to keep this really low cost, and so Aaron even was kind enough to do a mailing test to see if we could get through the mail, the U.S. mail from Arizona to Texas, without having to add an additional stamp. So we really got this down to something that's really low cost. So hopefully, if it works, we'll be able to share that with the other participants in the project.
Yeah,
thanks.
Awesome. Thanks. Welcome, Melanie. And we have, I think, Missy back on iPhone. Thanks for rejoining us. Does anyone else want to share anything else? We're just kind of doing general updates and anything you want to share.
Sure, I'll jump in. So the priority for Louisiana this fall is going to be kind of getting our volunteers to take ownership of their respective data collection sites and take the helm of volunteer training, managing the trail, letting us know if they need anything, but kind of taking over where I've been helping a lot with data collection, volunteer management, et cetera. And as the project wraps up, I just want to make sure that they're self-sufficient, they have all the resources they need, and we're walking them through all of the new things they might need to know with data collection when the new version of the app is out.
Good. Thank you. There's not any other updates. I just wanted to share a couple things on that are on our landing page for Time to Restore. So we have, as most of you on the call know, but we'll reshare this monthly newsletter that you can sign up for. This is it goes out usually like the first couple of days of the month. It's really taking a long time to verify, but it's basically just a sign up form. You put in your email and your name, and you're opting into just like a general update about the project. We do share trainings that are coming up. We also have, which I can share here, there's an archive of the past newsletters. We have a plant of the month feature in each of these, and we really try to give you a specific species and tips on how to observe this in Nature's Notebook. So a lot of observers have found this really useful, so we definitely recommend signing up for that. And then I also wanted to mention, David and I have been doing these monthly training calls on the first Wednesday of the month. And those are open to anyone who's in Time to Restore, participating in data collection, or just wants to hear an update about the project. We just added all the months through May to this sign up list. So you can sign up here and you can pick whichever months you want to attend. We're going to do a lot of these calls are kind of like a brief update or overview on the project, and then we'll give an update on data collection, and then most of the time is for Q&A, but we will have February and April reserved for kind of a full hour training for people who are still new to the project. So please, if you have new observers or people who want to just connect with others in the region who are doing this project, invite them to attend these calls.
Aaron, can I add one thing? On
Yeah.
the newsletters, y'all, if you get a chance to kind of flip through those and kind of look at them, we would love to highlight anything that y'all are seeing in your area as it relates to the project, or the native species that we're trying to observe. So if y'all run across anything and wouldn't mind sharing it, we would love to highlight that and include it in the newsletter. or a future newsletter. Just let us know. And if you need help kind of getting it into the format, I'd love to help to try to do that because we'd love that diversity in telling the time to restore story.
Yeah, we have a
Thanks,
section
Aaron.
that's like the data collection highlight, and yeah, we'd love to kind of rotate around and feature stuff going on in different states. So let us know if you have something to share. I'll also put the letter sign up in the chat if you're not on that. So that's basically it for the updates I wanted to share. Any last things that anyone else wants to talk about before we launch into feedback on phase 1 deliverables? All right. So what I was hoping to do over the next few months is kind of look back on what we put out at the end of phase 1 and think about the improvements we can make to the stuff that will come out, kind of the information we're going to be sharing out at the end of phase 2. So that's officially going to be September of next year. So we're planning on kind of pushing ahead with data collection through about next spring. And then we're going to be scaling way back on, pushing for new observers and trainings. And we're going to be refocusing on data analysis and trying to summarize what we have and be able to share that out in a format that's useful. So if you recall from the phase 1, which ended in 2023, we ended up with a couple different things. One was a story map that we put together that kind of gives it gives the information about what we did over the project. So it's fairly long, and it goes through kind of who's involved in the project, who we hope this information will serve. It goes through the team members. Then it goes through results from those early workshops that we did way back in 2021. So at that time, we didn't have Texas involved, but we did a kind of a kickoff workshop for the whole region. And then we did New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Louisiana state level workshops. And we had a number of questions that we ask about kind of like, what are your current resources that you use? What are the things that you would want? Where does phonology fit in? And then we asked some specific questions about what kind of phonology information would be useful in this work. And then a lot of questions about kind of the delivery mechanism of how we would want to serve that out. So all of this is summarizing those workshops and all that. We did get quite a bit of input on we call them like the metrics, the pieces of information that have to do with phonology that people would find interesting. It really was like everything, like people want to know about when does flowering start, how long does it last, when was the peak, and the flexibility. So we're trying to tackle all of this by focusing on the whole bloom season. We also asked about what kind of visuals would be of interest, and we came up with some ways to kind of show you the proportion of activity. So if you recall in Nature's Notebook, the way we record data is people go out and they look at a plant and then they say yes or no, either I see this or I don't see it. And so these graphics are really focused on trying to show that proportion of like how many people are going out and actually seeing a yes for open flowers. And then we try to pull in some iNaturalist data as well. So some of these graphics kind of include that. We also talked about how would you want to collect information going forward. We had a mix of people that wanted to use Nature's Notebook and iNat, so we have included both of those as options, although we're kind of focusing more on Nature's Notebook because of the ability to quantify that, like the start of flowering and then the duration and the peak a little bit more easily than with iNat. And we decided on a list of focal species for the region. We came up with that list of 8 species, and that was what we really pushed in our communications and our recruitment. We have a bunch of posters and stuff. And then we tried to summarize the data. We realized we still had not a lot of data on a lot of the species of interest, but we kind of summarized what we had so far. And then we brought in some of this climate projection information from the South Central Cask. What else did I want to share from this? And then a lot of the work we did for the kind of preliminary analysis had to do with trying to find some basic relationships between what we call climate cues, things like the seasonal temperature or precipitation, and how that related to the flowering or the seed timing. And then we brought that together with the projection information to try to say, by mid-century, we expect that flowering will shift by this much. So that was kind of the main work that we did. And so the story map describes all of that. And then the info sheets that we made kind of bring together like a very basic summary of that in a static form. So just to look at one example, the front page of this is basically like describing just like a what the literature says about how phenology is changing. We have this, when I mentioned the climate projections from the South Central Cask, which across the whole region kind of give you an idea of how you might expect things like temperature or like freezing or dry periods to be changing by mid-century under different climate change scenarios. And then we also had this section here on kind of what partners are doing in the region to do with pollinator conservation. And then the backside is going into basically what data we had available so far on a single species, and then a community calendar, and then that bringing in that climate projection and the simple models to look at potential shifts in flowering. So that's just like very quick overview of what we had. What I thought we could do is I'd love to put together a survey that will try to ask people that were part of those original workshops and anyone else who we feel like we could send this survey out to who's working on pollinator conservation or pollinator restoration in this region to just kind of present them with, this is what we had in phase one. Did you ever use any of this information? If you did use it, like what was useful about it? How did you use this information? And if not, like maybe we could ask about, what would be better or more useful. So I was hoping we could do kind of a brainstorm session today about refining the questions that will be on the survey that we can send out more broadly. So this part here is just basically what I was just describing. It's like the sections of the info sheet here listed out. And then I thought maybe we could ask like on a scale of 1 to 5, how useful was each of these components? And then if you did use them, like how did you use this information? And then we could ask something to do with, if you didn't use it or you didn't know about it, or if you have another suggestion for a different way to present it, maybe we could ask something about that. But any thoughts on that in terms of like, I guess I would welcome input on if you all have thoughts on what we could change about the info sheets, we can talk about that. But also if you have suggestions on how to ask other people in a survey about different ways that we could present this information or how it's been used so far.
Erin, I would also suggest asking how they found the information or what other avenues the information should be made available on. That was an awkward way to phrase that, but yeah.
Yeah. Like ways to distribute whatever comes out of the project, whether it's info sheets or an online tool or something.
And you're thinking this is like a virtual survey, or is it something people might be able to take in person at events?
Oh, that's a good question. Definitely virtual, but we could also potentially have something for in-person events. Yeah, for those of you that do the in-person events, do you feel like I guess you could have like an info sheet with you and ask about it? What are thoughts on that? Does that seem like it would be doable for those of you that are doing in-person stuff?
I think it would be doable. I think adding a survey component to the in-person training, especially if people are brand new to the program, could be really useful.
Mhm.
One of the things that we've found with the survey that we're doing is for in-person events, if we have like a little prize that people really like, and you say you don't get it unless you fill out the survey,
Uh-huh.
you get quite a few more people filling out surveys.
We could do that virtually too. We've done that before to try to incentivize and say it's like a raffle. Like if not everyone that fills it out gets it, but you'll be entered into a raffle and you get something in the mail. You could incentivize that way.
Yeah, everybody loves little freebies. Plus, then they feel like they're a part of something bigger than themselves, you know?
Yeah, maybe we could use the plant tags.
Aaron, is the assumption going to be that we'll know a bit about them and who their audience is and those kinds of things, or are we going to ask them to do that in the survey?
Yeah, that's a good
Um,
point. I think we probably would want to ask, yeah, like what is your relationship to the phenology or the
yeah, yeah,
pollinator conservation or restoration community or
yeah,
something?
yeah.
How do you use this in your work?
I also think it'd be really helpful here if we could learn a bit about not only who their main audiences are, but how they best disseminate information, and then go ahead and ask that question about what, in their opinion, is missing. So, don't just speak to what's in front of you, but what you would most like to see or find most helpful, or is there a different way of formatting it that would make it even more useful for you? Because I suspect the diversity of these individuals' audiences are vast,
Mm-hmm.
and that might make it very helpful if we could get to a bit more about who their audiences are, who their stakeholders are,
Uh-huh.
and a bit more about their purpose.
Yeah, so how would you phrase that? Like in general, how does your community share information, or would it be more
Yeah,
like for
yeah,
this particular kind of
because I have
information?
a feeling that people, depending on the focus of their, initiatives, will see information very differently in terms of how they
Mhm.
share it and how they process it and use it. And if we can get to that, it tells us what our deliverables need to look like
Uh-huh.
and need to be formatted. And I suspect that's probably pretty diverse.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Call back. Rob, what are you using for little gifts or giveaways that people seem to go for most often? Because I really like that idea.
Mhm.
But
The thing that has attracted people the most are these little squishy like animals
ooh,
that are like an anxiety ball or something. We have like eagles and moose and just some of the iconic animals around here. And
that's cool.
half the time that's what people grab, especially younger people, flashlights, water bottles, anything like that.
Well noted.
Gina, I'll
Yeah.
throw this out there. One of the things that I've used that gets 100% participation every time is a bee motel. So it's for mason bees primarily. We use those when we did outreach for Time to Restore first round, and anything I would have asked, everybody wanted to be in that drawing, and they were ridiculously cheap. They were like $14. We bought them for $14, and I had everybody participate. We had a full class, so anything that kind of furthers or relates to what we're doing, like the nest boxes or the bee hotels or insect hotels, that kind of further the garden's purpose is really attractive to them for some reason.
Gotta do. I've been doing native seed packets for self-collected native genotypes, but they do not look particularly appealing because they're just in like little balls of paper because I don't want to use the plastic. So I'll lab that one out. But thanks, y'all.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I've
yeah.
seen people, the seed balls are super popular, which require a little more work. You'd have to probably make them yourself, or you could have like a seed ball making thing if you're at a tabling event. Or I feel like people put them in paper and they look kind of cool. It just makes it
Yeah.
like look more interesting.
I'm not very crafty.
So,
I'll have to work with people, but I'll
Right.
step it up.
one more, y'all, that would, so when we did, so here in the Gulf Coast region of Texas, we do an annual wildscapes training that usually gets about 100, 125 attendees. One of the things that really gets them excited is these, they take individual plants that constitute a starter pollinator garden, if you can imagine that. So each one of them are kind of starter plants. I think there's about a dozen or 15 different species of plants that are in a box. When you take those up, and they're like in a bucket with a bow around it and everything. So you've got this kind of starter pollinator garden, if you can envision that. People go crazy for those, y'all, and there's almost no cost to those. And I got NIPSOT to we had a couple of individuals that are participants of the Grow Out program. That's a national effort. Those people can put those together at no cost to you. So think about that. If you could say, "Hey, I've got a starter pollinator garden here for you. If you'll just can complete a survey or participate in whatever, really got them excited about that. We've done that twice now, and it's had absolute home run.
Great.
It's a great idea. My bathroom's full of mallow starts of the uncommon native mallows, and I'm like, please get these out of my home. But get
Yeah.
on that.
Yeah, if you can find that. One more point on that, Gina. One of the things that we've had a real hard time here, and I suspect y'all are having it too, is starting and getting milkweed to a certain stage so that it can do its own thing in the wild. So if you've got somebody that's particularly good at starting milkweed, and you put together just 4 or 5 species of milkweed, I bet you could get just as much excitement. Same concept.
Mhm.
It's a good idea. Thank you.
So let's get back to this question. I kind of wanted to find out, if the pieces of information on the info sheet have been used in different ways. Does anyone have thoughts on, I thought we could ask like that ranking question, like for each section, like, was this useful to you? If you did find it useful, how did you use the information? But does anyone have a better idea about how to ask about that? I don't know. Have you seen any? I was trying to figure out how I would show that. I mean, I could like copy the text as an example and like put it in the survey so people don't have to be flipping back and forth, and try to make it like as easy as possible for people to look at like, what are you talking about? What are you asking me about? But it's also maybe useful to see it in the context of the info sheet. So any ideas about that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I mean, I actually haven't used the info sheets at all, but I feel like I'm still kind of on the periphery, getting my head around a lot of this stuff. I mean, I've been following your all's work for a while, but I haven't been directly like hands-on with any of it. So I wish I was more helpful, but hopefully we'll be in the future. But I do like your idea about possibly inserting it in the survey, at least to just show an excerpt of it, but you could put a hyperlink for the full thing. I think
Uh-huh.
also, yeah, I think also really you know, figuring out ways to make sure people know about those handouts because they look really helpful, but I haven't directly used it yet. So,
Yeah, well, I think what you're saying is it's a great example of like maybe the info sheets just seem a little bit like, I don't know, like a little distant or something like, oh, I haven't had the time to like read this whole info sheet. But maybe if the information was in a different format, it would be more like either easier to see or just like more in your face. Like, I don't know if it was on a website or something as more of a tool. So we're going to talk about that and kind of the alternative visualization options, but I don't know if anyone has thoughts on that, whether like, have you tried to give the info sheet out to anyone, or does it seem like there's any interest in that at all? Like, do people just not want to read info sheets anymore?
I mean, pictures are really worth 1,000 words. I mean, if you switch it more as an infographic, or some
Uh-huh.
sections could be infographics, then I
Yeah.
think that would pop out more.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm just thinking of even in my own little world at IAIA, like our communications department sends out a really cool newsletter every month. Unfortunately, it's just all text. And
Mhm.
so many people just like, oh, too many words, I don't want to read it. But
Yeah.
anywhere they have a picture and then it has a link that they could click it and then it takes them to where there's more info. But it's like, I think we're just in that age of Instagram, like where people want imagery to
Yep.
sort of at least that draws their eye to it and
Mhm.
then they can get more information, but that's one way to sort of capture the attention.
Yeah, Melanie, I would tag on to your comments there and say not only do they want that picture, that easy, digestible information, but they already want it concise.
Mhm.
They want the ability to go deeper, but they don't want to have to go deeper if they're not ready or want to.
Yeah, I
So,
think this might
uh,
be an example of trying to go
yeah,
right deep,
yeah,
way too deep
yeah,
from the
yeah, yeah.
beginning and like we
But
make
you want
that
to have
simpler.
that path. But Melanie's point's really good because
Mhm.
you want to have the path to be able to do that. So
Uh-huh.
Aaron, I think the one thing that's good about participants in this project is that they know that there's a deeper well that they're contributing to, and to be
Mhm.
able to go and experience and see and taste that really makes a big difference.
Yeah, yeah. So I don't think we should totally throw away the idea of an info sheet, but maybe if we do keep them, it could be something that's more like an infographic that gives like a suggestion of what you can get if you look at a tool on the website or something. And then that's where you could really like drill down and look at specific states or species or something like that.
Aaron, one thing I'd like to
Right.
see on them, we don't have a Texas info
Right.
sheet, but one of the things when I went to these early on and tried to figure out how to use them, one of the things that would have been very helpful is how to use it.
Mhm.
We don't do a very good job in at least the one that I spent a lot of time. I think I spent most time in Louisiana. Is how that this information might be used. If we could just carve out a little bit and be illustrative of how you might use this, I think it would really set this thing up to be much more digestible, much more usable, and much more exciting, quite frankly.
Yeah, I like that idea. Cool. So maybe I'll put together the survey that does ask about each of these sections, but I might include like the text version, and then maybe if we can figure out a way to kind of easily put it in a more visual form, we could ask people like, do you like this or do you like this? And just get an idea. We're kind of like a preliminary way to look at this. Any other thoughts on the info sheets? Those are the main things I was thinking of asking about in the survey, but any other thoughts on that? In terms of the story map, I was just gonna see if anyone has read the story map, and then if so, if there's like a particular part that they found useful. Again, I don't think we have to replicate the story map for this second phase, but we could if it seems like it's a useful way to kind of describe the project. So I just was gonna have like an open suggestion there, but I don't know, does anyone feel like, have you gotten any feedback on the story map? Do you know of anyone that you work with or have talked with has actually read it? I think I feel like the most useful or the place where we've used it the most is just communicating back to the cask kind of in a succinct way, like this is what we did over the project. But if it's just the funders that are receiving that, it's maybe not the most useful for the data user. So really want to keep working on improving that.
I definitely think it's beautiful, informative, and very well made, but it's hard for me to think about how I would slot that into outreach. It just feels
Yeah,
like a lot to ask people to dive into something like that. But
right.
I do think there's a place for it, just maybe not necessarily as an outreach tool.
Yeah, totally. All right. So in terms of just thinking about, I guess, thinking ahead to our next stage of kind of visualizing information, and I'll invite Erin Zalster to jump in here too, because she's put together these, and these are kind of older. I think that you made these last year, maybe, Erin, but we started to think about alternative ways to these types of calendars, which are more focused on a lot of these are the proportions, where it's like the proportion of yes out of no records. We thought about ways that we can give even more information that includes things like the sample size, like how many observations are we looking at here, rather than just like what was the proportion? Was it like 1 out of 10 or like 2 out of 100? You can't really tell much of a difference there. So these graphics actually include the circles, the size of the circles denote the amount of observations there. And this one is comparing for Buttonbush, it's looking at data from outside of the South Central region versus the orange is the South Central region. So it's a way to compare, like, is the phenology in this region different than other places in the country? Maybe that in particular isn't that useful, but it kind of shows you a way to show proportion, but also information about like the amount of data. And then we had also looked at this one is also that, although it doesn't compare to this region to outside of the region, it still shows you the amount of data collected with like the proportion of open flowers. And it gives you a measure of like how confident are we in those estimates, which might be useful as well. That's what the gray line denotes. Do you want to say anything else about this, Aaron Z?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, these were made a little while ago, but the idea being that um, that we want to convey, like you said, that proportion, but also some information about like the certainty associated with that. Because you can create those with any amount of data. And I think sometimes it can be a little misleading if there's, a couple people reporting on plants in one particular area, and that's all that represents. So trying to incorporate a little bit more information in these visuals without making them overwhelming to people. So these are not, I think there's a lot of improvements and kind of tweaks we can make here, but these were sort of a preliminary sort of start at trying to do that. So I think that's where it may be useful to come up with some alternatives and be able to show those to people and see what seems useful to them, what seems overwhelming to them, or indecipherable. So yeah, so that was the idea. I mean, Erin, you explained it just fine. Yeah, I think that makes sense. So any input you guys have in terms of like, oh, it'd be easier to see this way, or maybe if we tried this. And then the only thing I'll add too is that, it's always going to be contingent on how much data we have. So sometimes we can do these for certain species, and sometimes we just don't have enough data yet. But I think the hope is that if we go through all of phase two, that'll be a whole nother spring's worth of data. And so that will just increase our ability to kind of create some of these useful graphics.
Yeah, the last one on here is kind of simpler information to the line graph here, but it doesn't have anything about the confidence interval. But I think that maybe the nicer thing is you could imagine like stacking more of these on top of each other and seeing like multiple species compared to each other. Whereas I think when you start doing that with these kind of graphs, it's just like a little bit more difficult to see maybe the overlap or the differences in the timing between different seasons. But it also shows the sample size here as well. And actually we had put this little dotted line to show like a suggestion of what we might consider to be like a minimum amount that we would want to see. And the purpose of this might be more for people like the state coordinators where you're trying to like, get people up to observe more consistently across the year or something like that. But we wouldn't necessarily have to present this if it's like sharing information about the phenology. It's more about like the effort that we're going towards or working towards.
And yeah, Melanie, I saw your comment. I think interpretation is going to be the key, right? Like being able to tell people, here's the thing you need to look at, and here's what's important here. And I think on a static sheet, that's going to be harder and a little more tricky. If we have something online, I can imagine lots of ways of doing that, even just a little, like a little I button here where they can click it and get more information, or something that pops up that helps people concentrate on the important parts of the figure and help interpret them for them. I think that's going to be really important. So it's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm thinking is like we're talking about I mean, some of what you're showing us is like open flowers, right? So maybe having, I mean, they could be small, they don't have to be huge, but like a few images of a few of the open flowers that are blooming at that time of year, just to sort of like, oh, draw the attention and then people know, oh, this graph is about that, you know? Um, I I'm sorry, I have to log off because I have to go pick up my son from school, but yeah, I'll look forward to the next meeting and I hope you all have a nice week.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Aaron, one of the things that it just occurred to me when Melanie made that comment and Aaron followed up. One of the things we probably should be very mindful of as we build these, we need to make sure that the graphics we're using work for all of the species we're tracking and observing, because you can very easily see where you might make an assumption about a particular graphic that may or may not be particularly telling or an accurate presentation of how the data was meant to be displayed or used.
Yeah, are you thinking like for species that would have like more than one period of flowering or?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly where I was going with that. Particularly
Yeah.
species that have a much longer process in terms of when they're in flower. Are going to look very different, and you might make assumptions that will be particularly problematic if you're in a rush, and we're all in a rush. That's the problem with our society. Our society wants it quick and fast, and it doesn't necessarily is not as mindful. Now, hopefully, the people that we're trying to most educate are a bit more mindful of that. But I just thought the type of graphic may matter if we're not careful here in terms of kind of a plant that has a blue bonnet's going to have a very different interval than say a Turk's cap that's in bloom, particularly in much of our study area throughout the year with very little downtime.
Mhm.
Just a thought.
Yeah, I think there's like an extreme version of this where you're trying to just like make it as easy as possible, where you tell people like these are the months that we expect to see this blooming, rather than like relying on them to look at a graph and interpret it. And I wonder like how far we should go down that interpretation path, because we want to make it as easy as possible, but we also want to show like what information is backing what we're saying,
Yeah,
um, and
yeah,
not make it oversimplified. Because I think that's what we're trying to get
yeah,
away from with a lot of those bloom calendars. It's like they tell you it's like a
yeah,
summer bloomer, but we're trying to give them specific information.
yeah,
But I also don't
yeah,
know about a lot of people looking at a graph like this, they'd be like, I don't know what I'm looking at. This, even
yeah,
with like the
yeah.
descriptions that are very jargony, we'll have to be careful about that.
Yeah, yeah, which is to the whole point of us being more illustrative, if you will, on how to use this information,
Hmm.
or how to go and get more detail behind some general trends or presentations. That may be kind of how we do it, where we invite them to go deeper to get to their own best answers.
Hmm. Yeah, so our hope with this survey is to try to get enough input on like what are the ways that you actually want to see this information and kind of your ideal way to visualize that would inform like maybe an online tool that we can put together. And so we are thinking we could come up with at least one, but maybe a couple options if it seems like there's really different ideas that we then kind of mock up in like pilot tools. And then we could share back at like a future quarterly meeting, or we could get people together to actually like talk it through and then make refinements and have that be kind of the final output next year. So in terms of like what that could look like, I feel like if we want to go back to thinking about, the idea with this project is trying to figure out how are things going to be different under future climate conditions. And that's why we tried to leverage like the South Central Climate Adaptation Science Center's projections of how temperature is going to be different, and then try to figure out, well, how does, temperature relate to flowering right now, and then project forward. So we have these very basic models that we put together. I'm sure Erin Souster has other ideas for like ways we can do that in a better way. But we were thinking in a tool format, you could kind of imagine something where you could like move the tool in time to say like, show me what this calendar would look like in like 2050, or like maybe beyond that, and have it be more interactive in that way. But I don't know if, does that seem like it's something that would be possible to do if we had the models in place. I guess you could do any decade in the future, but does that seem realistic?
It seems like it would be definitely useful, or at least um, very informative. And I'm wondering if there's a way to also go back for some of these areas. Are there robust phenology data so that we can show how much these species have already shifted?
Yeah, so we do have two students that have been working on scoring herbarium specimens. So
Oh,
that's
nice.
kind of the main like historical data that we have. And we haven't looked at those data yet. So I can't say anything about the usefulness there. Um, in terms of our Nature's Notebook data don't go back that far in time. A lot of, that's kind of why we did this project, was we didn't have a lot of data from this region. We wanted to try to fill in the gaps there. There might be INOT data that we could use going back a little farther, but again, those are kind of like, just a snapshot in time, not really about the onset of flowering or the peak. So I don't know if others have thoughts on that, like Erin, Z, or even Teresa.
Yeah, I think I totally see, obviously the value in this would be immense, right? I think people would really appreciate like, hey, we have some idea what's going to happen. It's just, it's going to be pretty tricky depending on data. Like the herbarium data could be really interesting. That is pretty complicated to try and combine all these different types of data. And in terms of making climate projections, it's just really going to depend on how much data we have on the particular phenophases you're interested in over space, because we're not going to have a lot of years repeated. So I think that most likely we could do this for probably a subset of the species, like that are really have been much more intensely monitored. But it certainly won't be possible with the data we have for like a large majority of our species, just because there's just so much uncertainty there. And you need a lot of repeat observations, like a lot of individuals monitored over space and time. But I think we could try and do this for a few of the species that have been well monitored through this project and others in that region. So yeah, I think there's some possibilities here, and I totally understand the value. It's just going to be data constrained.
Yeah. Yeah, so I could see having it, have certain settings, like maybe the year, the decade in the future would be really cool. But maybe like you could drill down into like the state you were interested in. And with all of these, we could, have it show if there's insufficient data, it would just say that like we don't have enough data yet. But that's why we need people to keep collecting data as part of this project.
Yeah, Aaron Z. So that brings up a really interesting conundrum, I guess. Is there a magic number or a magic period that kind of, because since I primarily do outreach, that's what I do. That's what I live for. That's what I have a passion for. One of the things that always gets presented to me is how long before we start to get real answers and know real facts. And so, is there somewhere from the statistician standpoint in the back room that says, I think we'll start to feel better about the data at X or Y? Do we have, I that question always comes up, and of course that's what drives people to keep doing this. So maybe we come at this from two different standpoints, but it makes me wonder if we'll ever be able to do that without having 100 years of data or something.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's such a good question, and yeah, everybody wants to know it.
Yeah.
And no, there's not one answer, right? There's just not.
I knew you
But
were going to say that.
I know, and I hate it. I'm like, yeah, you know what I'm going to say. I'm sorry. But I think, in terms of like, if you want to know trends for a particular area over time, like often we think like we'd like at least 10 years of data to say something about a trend for that area. However, I think if you're thinking about, what kind of, how is phenology associated with different weather patterns that we're seeing with climate and things like that, then we might have a little bit more flexibility if we have a lot of individuals that are monitored in some different areas. We can start thinking about like, what does the climate look like here? What does it look like here? If we have a lot of individuals that are monitored at different places over the course of a few years, that does give us more power. So I think in terms of making recommendations too, the more individuals we have for a particular species, that's really, really valuable. And it doesn't need to necessarily be all in different places. Having replicates in a small area or at the same site is very, very useful. So I think in some ways, if the more you can get people, I think, excited about particular species and lots of people about the same species so that there's just a lot of data collected for that, that's going to give us a lot more power. I think that's why I was saying I think it might be possible for a subset of species that people are interested in throughout the South Central Cask and have more individuals monitored. There are going to be some species where there's no possible way with what we have right now. So I know that's not a satisfying answer at all, but I would definitely encourage if there are lots of people that are interested in milkweeds in that area, I think saying like, hey, this particular species of milkweed, the more data we collect here, we're close to being able to
Yeah.
kind of get at that. That's really powerful, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and one last point there, because when you're doing outreach here, the first question that comes up to me is which species do you not have being observed? And really that's a quandary because you want to say, well, guess what? We've got a pretty good data start on X species, but they're kind of wanting to make it more complete. So yeah, no, thanks for the answer. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, I would also add, I mean, people, of course, want to collect data on plants that they're particularly interested in. You don't want to discourage that, right? For sure. But I think this might be like putting some of this info out there might be the kind of thing that would encourage people like, hey, this is the data we have here, but there's a lot of uncertainty here. If we have you and your friend and your neighbor and someone else collecting data on this plant, we're going to get a much cleaner, more interesting story to tell here. And so maybe that can at least interest some people in changing their perspective a little bit, not just on broadening the taxonomic scope, like the number of species, but like how the quality of information or you know, the quality of our estimates improve for particular species of interest. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, it's a really interesting idea. We've with our the badges that we have right now for campaigns, it's all about like how much you're observing your own individual plant. We've never really had one that's like, for this region, we're looking for like this many data points and like help us get there. And almost like a milestone kind of graphic where people could see like, oh, if I take this species on, that'll like meet their goal that they have. But that's a really interesting idea, maybe for our new app to kind of focus on it that way. And I could see the tool, if we are able to come up with like what's a really neat way of visualizing this for the species we do have enough data for, I think that would get people excited about like that's what I could see for my species that I care about if there's more data, you know, and this is like what it would look like and how I might use that information. Be a good motivator. Is there anything else that we would want to ask in this survey? And again, we're planning on sending this to our large group of people that are on this list that we send out the quarterly call information to, which is, I think it's over like 150 people that some of them are not at their current positions anymore. So I get quite a few bounces, but there are a lot of people distributed across the region that are working on pollinator restoration and conservation. And then we can also distribute it more widely. I think we'd invite those individuals to share it out with anyone who wants to give input on phase two. So anything else you would want to know from that community? Any other questions we should ask? It doesn't have to be about the things we've talked about, but other things as well. Does anyone have thoughts on, I guess, I feel like we have done this before, maybe it's been in the quarterly calls, but kind of asking about preferences for what visualizations could look like. I don't know if we want to get more input on like, do you like a line graph versus a calendar kind of tool? We've gotten a little bit of that so far. I think most people say like, oh, I like both. I want all of it in one. So we could just keep it like very inclusive and have like everything we could imagine as part of these preliminary tools and then try to narrow it down after we have some like real information that they could look at.
It sort of seems like that might be the best way to go is, mock up some more examples that we don't invest a ton of effort into, and then ask more pointed questions.
Yep, I was just about to say the same. I think we can work together and figure out, you know, a couple simple, not simple, but cleaned up sort of versions of these where, you know, on these I wasn't necessarily looking so much at like, what terminology was I using on this axis and what's in here, but you know, we can create something where, and then very specific questions for people like, does this make sense? Do you like this? Or does this make sense to you? Or, you know, something like that. So I think we can work up a few examples that have different elements that we can ask people about specifically, maybe.
Yeah, it would be interesting to try to come up with some things that like maybe not just text-based, but like really simplified, where with like, I don't know, almost like fuzz this and make it one bloom season with like, you know, some uncertainty at the edges rather than I feel like it's kind of busy to look at it this way. I think it has a lot more information, but maybe taking a step back and making it like a simplified version of this could be good. And then it would be nice to try to make an example that had multiple species to show that idea of like a community calendar and how you might, because I think that that'll help people envision like how would I use this if I'm trying to plan, coverage across the seasons for different pollinators active at different seasons.
Aaron, is it and maybe this is to both Aarons, is it unreasonable, or would it be unreasonable to actually pose an initial question through this tool, pose an initial question, and then literally kind of present data that we believe would answer that question or help out in that question, and then ask them to then weigh in on whether they believe that's an effective way to use the data to create a useful tool? I mean, I don't want to me, that feels a little leading. So I am nervous about that, but it seems to me one of the challenges we've had, and I've tried to use these when I'm doing kind of just general presentation to try to understand if it's landing. And I always think it lands a little better, or they feel it or taste it a little better, if I can set up the scenario on how that data would help us answer a question or take an action. And so I'm wondering is, can we take this tool and use a bit of that and then get our stakeholders to weigh in on the efficacy of that, or is it in the right direction? Because I think then we may be getting into a situation where we get real benefit without having to wonder whether we did that. Just a thought.
Yeah, I like that. I think we could definitely do that in this, like the next meeting we have, where we've come up with some tools and maybe even do it in like breakout rooms or something. We could have, like, if we have 2 or 3 different options, send them into different rooms and say, like, here's your question. Can you try to answer, like, what's the best, I don't know what the question would be. Yeah. If you want to cover or have nectar available for pollinators in this season, like what species would you plant, and see if they can like use the tool to figure out the answer. And see if it's different across groups. That could be interesting. I think it would be harder maybe
that's
to do
exactly
with a
where I
survey,
was
but
going.
yeah,
That's exactly where I was going, Aaron, because I think that then we know we're using what the limited constraints of the data we have in a way that matters and makes that lands with the stakeholders that we're trying to reach.
Yeah, we can play around with that for the survey, but at least for the call, I think it would make sense to do it more of like a discussion format. But yeah, it's a great idea. Thank you. Any other last thoughts before we wrap up, or other stuff that you thought of that you want to talk about? We'll try to get the survey pulled together in the next week or so and then send it out. And definitely you're welcome to send it to whoever you think would be interested in giving input on this. We'll try to keep it comprehensive enough that, if people haven't been coming to the meetings and they're not familiar with the project, they could still give their input.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for
we
giving
learn
great
so
input.
much when we come together like this. So thanks so much for sharing your thoughts and ideas. It really does make it better. Thank you.
Yeah. Take care, everybody. Thanks again.
Nice to meet you all.
Bye. You too.